One of the most common complaints that I hear about trying to eat healthy is that it requires so much effort. Like in the case of carnivore, travel is a lot harder. Social eating takes more planning. Even just trying to work through cravings and not let your eating be a free-for-all takes effort. And a lot of people find this so depressing to the point where they just want to give up. I totally get this. There are times when I get tired of having to fight our food environment all the time. Not just for myself, but even for my kids, who are constantly bombarded with snacks and treats everywhere they go. But if you do nothing, you will conform to the world around us, because that is what's easiest and most convenient. The path of least resistance is the standard American diet, and we are constantly prompted to eat. The standard American diet has given us the most diseased and unhealthy human population in history, and making the effort to counter this is required if you want to have a state of health that is different from the vast majority of people who are following that diet. I've talked before about how 2 years into the carnivore diet, I became pregnant with my third child and was unable to keep meat down for the first trimester. So I did not do carnivore for the whole pregnancy. And when my nausea subsided and I did start eating meat again, I had a really hard time getting back to it after the stimulation of the carby foods that I was once again eating. And there was a day when I was in prayer and meditation after a really hard day of wrestling with food and trying not to eat junk. And in this meditation, I was shown this imagery of a brick wall surrounding me that had turned into a crumbled pile of rubble. I understood in that moment that I had built this wall over my carnivore journey, brick by brick, with all of these little bits of effort that I made toward having better health. I'd read this study here. I'd say no to a moment of binge behavior there. I'd work on one of these episodes or a newsletter or read a book on nutrition. Staying immersed in these health-oriented activities was what made up all of these little bricks in my wall. And that wall protected me from the crazy modern food environment that we live in. I could see that if I don't spend a little time and effort every day to nourish my boundary, my wall, my motivation, my why, then that constant pinging from the world starts wearing that wall down until it eventually crumbles. I knew very clearly in this meditation that this had happened to me during the pregnancy. I remember the first few times I deviated from carnivore, it was a huge deal. After nearly 2 years of mostly carnivore eating, it was incredibly strange. But then it slowly became less and less strange. And as I let the normal ways of the parties and gatherings and outings trickle back into my life, because I thought, what difference does it make? I can't do carnivore right now anyway. It all became normal. And then I had no brick wall left. So then every time some normal food opportunity came my way, which was all the time, I was directly vulnerable to those things. And I very often participated in them until I came back to carnivore again. Your brick wall is either being strengthened or it's breaking down. There is no middle ground. This is true of structures in general. Think about your house. Wind, rain, sun, all sorts of elements from the outside are constantly hitting and breaking down the exterior. And if you don't work to maintain that structure, it will eventually fall apart. So yes, maintenance and effort is required by the very nature of the modern food environment we live in. We are bombarded with food advertisement and suggestions that we should eat. You have to walk through a gauntlet of candy bars anytime you want to check out at the store. You cannot go to the movies without smelling popcorn. If you want to go to the mall to buy some clothes, you're going to run into the smell of Mrs. Fields cookies or Auntie Anne's pretzels wafting down the hallway. I literally went to Macy's a few weeks ago. I hadn't been there in years, and I could not believe it, but there was a bunch of chocolate and candy in the checkout of Macy's. Out in the wild, in everyday life, that wall is going to be pinged again and again and again. And you have to be so careful anytime you deviate from carnivore, whether it's a planned deviation for the holidays or an accidental binge. Each time you deviate, it will start to feel more and more normal. And once you start tasting those foods again, your brain will respond to the dopamine fireworks, bringing back that affection for food right along with it. I actually like to use the same brick wall metaphor and imagine that anytime I deviate, it's like taking a sledgehammer to some of those bricks. Whereas every time I immerse myself in the teachings and principles that support this way of eating, that's the equivalent of taking fresh mortar and adding a new level of bricks to that wall, making it harder for the outside world to get in. The good news is that once you get the wall built, it's nowhere near as difficult to maintain as when you're building it in the first place. The most effort is required in the beginning, as you work the hardest to change your mindset to prioritizing health, as you go through the logistics for setting up your life ordered toward prioritizing carnivore, whether that's meal planning or something else. But eventually, a lot of it becomes habit. Your brick wall is built, and that's when things get a lot easier. My experience with carnivore during this last pregnancy made me realize that when I'm left to the modern world without boundaries and without intention, if I stop making the effort to watch my thoughts and protect myself from the influences of our highly gluttonous world, I will eventually return to having an affection for modern foods as my default state, and then start to feel resentful when my health gets really bad and that it's so hard to fight off the constant promptings of indulgent foods. It is a shame how hard it is to avoid indulgent foods, how they're at every gathering, they're all over your social media feed, they're on the billboards as you drive down the highway. But that is just how it is, and that's not changing anytime soon. You have to change. And though it does take effort to do something different, I remind myself that I'd rather put up a fight than succumb to the eating norms of our society that made me so sick for all of my life until I found the carnivore diet. Subscribe to my channel to keep getting more episodes supporting carnivore. And if you want to hear from me in between episodes with more studies, bonus articles, and motivation for staying on the carnivore diet, sign up for my email newsletter at www.theroadtocarnivore.com.